Welcome to this engagement event hosted by DWP on the DWP Management Consultancy. I'm Heather Kovakus, and I'm the head of the Central Government Program. Great, I think that's all of the sort of housekeeping things we have this morning. So I will hand it over to Tom.
Thanks, Heather. Thanks. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for coming today. We're slightly depleted in numbers, and it's not to do with the winter of discontent or strikes. It's to do with rail theft. So one of our colleagues is stuck somewhere in the East Midlands because somebody decided to take some of the overhead cables last night. So we are slightly depleted today. So from a DWP perspective, it's myself and Stephen. So unfortunately, Stephanie can't be with us today. The plan for this morning is we're going to whiz through the agenda. As you saw at the beginning, there was a highlight of what we put up from a very brief introduction from the publicity information and some of the kind of follow-up to that. Today is very much a pre-market engagement activity. We've done quite a bit of work to get us to where we are now. It's not definitive. We're here to kind of show and tell, for want of a better phrase, and get the feedback, good, bad, and indifferent in all of that. And that will help shape our next steps. And we'll talk about timelines as we go through, if that makes sense. Just before we start, I thought it would probably be useful just to kind of position what it is, what it isn't that we're looking at from this framework perspective. So the way that the organisation is set up from a commercial perspective, there are certain attributes of commercial that sit in different pillars to Stephen and Stephanie's area of professional services. So you'd expect to see digital elsewhere. There's estates, there's HR, there's the comms and marketing side of it. Now, that doesn't mean that from a management consultancy perspective, all of that is outside of this agenda, because as we go through and talk about the various lots that we've constructed for this plays very much to some of this is strategy, which would then become at the higher level element. And we talk about some of those subcomponents that would then play out to maybe a digital agenda, maybe an HR specific bit, comms, marketing, etc. So it all plays into it. So just be aware of that, if that's okay. And then obviously feed back to us anything that might seem slightly disjointed, or if the messaging isn't strong enough, then we'd welcome that feedback, if that makes sense. I've decided to do the agenda twice on that. I don't really know why that happened, but anyway, I didn't need to go back before. So this is what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about the problem statement, where we are, where we've come from, what it means, what the current kind of practice is, if that makes sense. And then that's leading us to why are we doing this? Why are we looking at creating our own framework at this particular time? Why do we want to do something different from what it is? We're going to talk about operating the consultancy framework, and you're going to say, well, there can't be that many different ways to operating a framework. This is going to be subtly different and more akin to the way that GLD operate theirs, for any of you who've operated with the GLD framework position. So it's more of a taxi rank basis. And so there's a kind of an element to that. There are some scenarios later on. We're not going to do role play or anything, but it's just to give you an example of various particular aspects of it. The colours mean nothing. So there's a corporate colour in there that I've missed out. I apologise. If there's the wrong RBG in there, then equally apologies for that. When we talk about SMEs and the ordering of them, that's got nothing to do with any preconception. It's all just because it's an example. And I'll kind of put that caveat as we step through.
Hopefully nobody's colourblind.
Well, in which case they're all grey, and that's fine. Then we'll talk about next steps and what that means, timelines, and then we'll take questions and feedback. Really not sure how long it's going to take. Probably the content may well be half an hour, 40 minutes. We can then take feedback from that. We can take as much or as little feedback as you are willing to give us throughout the course of the hour and a half that we've got allotted for this. Hopefully you've all seen a kind of supporting pin notice, and we will be following this up with an RFI. That should all be coherent with the message that A, we've put out thus far, and B, that we're going to talk about today. Let's dive in and talk about what it is. So I'll let you have a read of that, and then I'll kind of voice over it, if that makes sense. So Stephen's here and runs a lot of the management consultancy mini competitions at the moment that the organisation does through MCF3 and the mini comp element or the mini comp requirement of that. As you'd expect, with what's gone before with COVID recovery, cost of living crisis, government efficiencies and all of that, the number of consultancy requirements and opportunities are increasing in number, but they're also increasing in speed to delivery as well. And one of the challenges that we have, just so you may or may not be aware, so with central government controls, there are controls at 3 levels with management consultancy spend, that is pure consultancy spend. Below 120,000, that's inclusive of VAT. Then it's up to 600,000 is within the department. And that, at ministerial level, and then 600,000 and above, including VAT, is with Cabinet Office. So when we talk about the controls and we talk about various activities, that's some of those constraints when we talk about speed to market. It's not a case of looking to circumvent those, but it's looking to operate within the rules, but also to optimise that speed to delivery, bearing in mind the size of the consultancy and understanding that this is a route to market option rather than a mandated you shall use. And we'll talk about values as we go through. Pretty much all of the activity, keep me honest on this, is through MCF3 and the various lots on there. Number of mainly change and complex lot is the main course through that. And of course, we would look to retain that particular capability anyway, because as we get through the framework and appoint that position, there may well be opportunities that would lie with a different supply chain or a broader supply chain that isn't catered for in the framework that we're looking to establish. So this bit about anticipated expenditure, which of course, cutting to the chase, what's in it for me kind of activity from a market perspective. How much have we spent? How much are we likely to spend? And how have we spent it historically? Well, I'm not going to answer any of those questions because it's all too difficult. Why is it all too difficult? Because during COVID, there were loads that came through. There were various different other frameworks that were set up elsewhere by central government, Cabinet Office, etc., that kind of catered for that. So the figures and the numbers that we look through from a historic spend basis come with a kind of health warning to it. So when we looked at it, we got to a point around about 10 million. Some were COVID, some weren't COVID. We looked at the current tracker and the current pipeline. Figures weren't hugely dissimilar. Then we looked at, well, what's it made up of? Then there were some big ticket items. So there's been a recent framework award in the region of 3.2 million. So that kind of changes some of the dynamics from a spend perspective. But equally, we know that there's a lot coming to help with the efficiency agenda, service transformation and various other long-standing programs that are now getting to that clutch point that needs to have the activity. So understanding what it looks like, we've built it up and we'll step into what it looks like at the moment. But historically, the size of spend is somewhere between about 20k up to 1.4 million. There are some bigger ones that sit outside of that, from 1.4 up to 3.2. But again, there are kind of nuances and circumstances round about that. When we did the analysis, that was all about what we spent before. So just to kind of build out on that, we've got 2 other bits that we've gone to the broader business with, and that is very much the change program per se, but also there's a large program that sits alongside the normal change program, if you have a normal change program, that is service transformation, which is another massive project program in its own right. So that's another opportunity that we've built into the framework value and the headroom for this. The other bit is procurement, and that's procurement as a service. It's procurement as many things, from development, from knowledge transfer, etc. To build it in. It's to augment some of the other activities where it's already catered for through G Cloud or other specific activities. So just to be really clear about this, that this augments and is complementary to, and that's going to be a repeat theme. So we're not looking to circumvent the current rules. We're not looking to replace the programs and the frameworks that Cabinet Office, CCS have in place. This is to augment that, and it all comes back to the speed to market. Hopefully that gives a background, better or worse, as to where we are, where we've come from, and what the kind of the evolving need is. So what is it we're going to create? So we're looking to create a framework, circa £9 million per annum. And this is where we kind of get into the nitty-gritty, the detail over the specifics of the spend profile, and we look at where it is, where it's going to. We're going to look at those other bits that we've built the headroom into that we were talking about before, and the uncertainty that we know is going to materialise fairly quickly. Because this is all a very evolving position and will change over the next 24, 36 months or so, we're not looking to put this in for a long period of time because our particular position will have changed significantly in that period. Economics change, politics change, societal requirements change within that. So rather than nail it down for a longer period, we're doing it for 24 months with the potential to extend for a further 1 year beyond that. Coming back to that first bit right at the outset, and spoke about speed to market, spoke about the constraints that we have, those central controls that we have on top of that to curtail the emotional spend of management consultancy. We've decided to kind of play within the controls boundaries and bring it down to smaller pieces of work. £600,000 is the limit, bearing in mind that there is the opportunity, and we will always compete larger pieces where it's appropriate to do so. And in this case, everything above 600,000, and it being a discretionary framework that we're creating. Because of coming back to that comment about how does the spend look like, where has the spend come from, we've taken it up a level rather than bringing it down to the lot level. So we're retaining the flexibility of the contract value at the higher level rather than at the lot level. And the reason for that is when we've looked at the historic spend, there have been bits that you could have categorized in one lot or another or both lots, and therefore just for convenience and just to give us everybody, both suppliers and the buyer, with this, that freedom for maneuver and that general flexibility, that's why we've lifted it up a level. Obviously, the devil will be in the detail and will be a commensurate part of the contract management activity that will go on once the framework's been let, and that interrelationship with all of the suppliers on all of the lots to keep everybody up to date with what it is and how it's going to operate. There are the 4 lots: change and transformation, organisational design, strategy, and procurement. We'll come on to, there is more detail. It's not just those kind of 4 bullet points. And hopefully the detail is sufficiently more than that, but without being too prescriptive in those elements of it. So it all comes back to understanding the interpretation of what it is. You'll all be far better at it than I am when it comes to understanding the nuances of when's strategy, when's org design, when's process improvement, and all of that. And that's how it plays, hence that kind of flexibility and fluidity. Again, not wishing to bang the drum, but it is a discretionary, it's not mandated, as the sole element, but it is a route to market for our colleagues in the business as well as commercial to consider. Of course, they would consider it strongly because of the speed to market and the enablement that it gives, particularly for a supply chain that has been created and focused solely for DWP's requirements. Did everything make? Yeah. Okay. Anything on this?
No, I think just on the levels of spend. So it's anywhere from 0 up to 120k. It's governed within the business. So that's at our discretion, but that still takes a period of time. Over 120, it's ministerial. Then 600 is that. So it's, we have either 1 governance, 2, or we end up with 3. And that's the problem we encounter, unfortunately. And things like the spending review impacted on this as well, where we had a one-year deal. DWP has not been able to set its plan for the forthcoming years. Now it has. Some of things like service modernisations are 10-year programmes, so they'll be into the next spending review and beyond. So some of them could be quite significant programmes, but there'll be some precursor work to those as well. And that's where we need to get off the ground fairly quickly. And if we start going through all those governance steps, we start looking at not awarding contracts till nearly February with one thing and another. And the business literally every time they come to us, or ministers, some of this is ministers who are providing this these requirements. It's just not quick enough for us. And you'll probably find that with most government departments if you've been working with them, that they have similar or probably some elongated process that they have to go through.
Great, thank you. So here is the detail that I promised you. It's not massive, but it does provide some. And yes.
You'll be sharing the slides.
Yes, you can have the slides afterwards. You can have the RFI as well immediately afterwards, and the feedback forms and everything.
Capture all of it.
No, you don't need to capture all of it. This is more of a kind of open briefing where you can have all of the material. And this is the bit that I'd really kind of value the feedback on. And so, have you thought about this? This doesn't work well there. It works better over there. Maybe you want to condense this lot with that lot. What does that mean? Does it make it bigger? Merely from a PowerPoint perspective, yeah, we could combine some of the lots, then they'd look a bit better together. We kind of spread it out. But anyway, but from that broader bit, this is the bit that we're looking to basically break it down into change and transformation. You're probably going to say, why don't we start with strategy with lot 1? Yeah, could change the naming convention and the order. But when we went through it, it was just a case of what we looked at. Do you take it from the strategy perspective or do you take it from the business process? So what we did was, so that's change and transformation. That covers off a lot of the change agenda at the planned and the major program activity, as well as the evolving elements of it. There are some bits in lot 2, which are both BAU type of activity as well as change within that. So there is this overlap. You'll see the overlap starting to come in, particularly around about capacity planning and efficiencies and things like that. And the question will be is, where do we get that to meld around? And that will always be an element of management within the framework between Stephen's team and the supply chain and the suppliers within the lot to work through, and of course the business and those directorates within that to see how it where it lies and where it best sits. There's a large element about procurement on the right hand side. A lot of that's driven by capacity, capability, volumes, etc. Also about organisation improvement or changes in operating system, if that makes sense. So I'll just give you a moment to digest that. If anybody wants to make a comment now, that's great. Equally, I'll take it at the end, whatever works. There is one bit that I just draw your attention to. So upskilling and knowledge transfer, the last point in organisational design. There is a broader framework that exists within DWP for upskilling activities. This is absolutely project specific. So if there was a piece of work that was going on, that's to augment that. It's also to enable that knowledge transfer if it was going to be a sizable piece of knowledge transfer activity that we would expect above and beyond the normal contractual elements that you would expect from knowledge transfer as part and part of project delivery. Just want to tease that bit out really, because there are some bits and we just need to be really mindful of whose feet we could potentially be treading on internally with some of those extant agreements. If we're okay, I'll move on. Yeah. So how are we going to set this up? Mindful at the moment that there are a myriad of frameworks and a myriad of places. What we were wanting to do was to cut to the chase with an appropriate number of suppliers pertinent to the DWP that were a cross section of SMEs and non-SMEs. I know the non-SME tag isn't helpful, but I didn't want to start using descriptors that could then get into different tiering levels and any perceived levels of bias or whatever. So we're describing it as major suppliers, i.e. not SMEs and SMEs. And what we envisage is 4 lots, 5 suppliers. Of those suppliers, 2 are going to be SMEs. Meets the SME agenda. We thought long and hard about how we address the SME activity, and we want the SME activity for 2 particular reasons. One is there are specific SMEs that play pertinent to DWP. There are some very specific elements, specific activities that those SMEs play into that broader skill set and requirements that DWP need. And equally, there is the government's agenda round about SMEs and SME inclusion more broadly. When we talk about non-SMEs, that doesn't mean if you are a large supplier that we wouldn't want you to onboard any specific SMEs if you wanted to, and if that was part of your particular USP, that would be fine. That would be absolutely perfect in that particular regard. The reason that we're not mandating it and we are not driving to a broadened value chain is because it all comes back to value size, opportunity, what it means more broadly, and the affordability and the profitability for all of those concerned within that. So this is the bit where we're going to talk about the call-off process and it being a rotational, and apologies, cab rank basis. For anybody who is offended by the colours, I apologise. For those who are colourblind, again, we've got grey, 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 grey and grey in there, and we can move it on from that. So there are a number of things that are on this particular slide pertinent to the operation of the framework. So I'll talk about in the next slides about what the scenarios could look like, what that would mean, etc. But because we're looking at a value element and we've already articulated what it could be, 0 to 600k, there will always come the point that will say, I've done this piece of work and I now need to extend it, or I want so-and-so to come back and do it. It all comes back to, from the business point of view, it needs to be planned at the beginning. Contractually and legally, we can only extend any call-off by a maximum of 50%, cognizant of that broader framework level. So if somebody is going to want to do something for 120k, for instance, and then say, well, I need to extend it for another 120k. No, we're really clear about what this means. So we are driving the viewpoint and the agenda, and it will absolutely become a two-way street when we get to the contracting element of it, to make sure that each statement of work is right-sized with the right deliverables at the right time for that. So if there are elements that would suit a bigger package, then there is the need to make it a bigger package rather than sneak it into sub 120k or whatever, if that makes sense. So that's that from an extension perspective, and that kind of sets the tone about sneaking in extensions or second, third, fourth pieces of work because of course that then disenfranchises everybody within the framework. It then ruins the whole aspect of the rotational basis of it. And then when we have that open conversation about spend and opportunities throughout the period of it, it then becomes really clear and obvious as to where that has been skewed to the detriment of everybody apart from two organisations, if that makes sense. The FVRA aspect is very much geared towards the SME element. Again, it comes to value. Again, we would expect with the levels that we're setting that this will not become a problem. There is, of course, if we were to go for a larger, higher element, that would then play into it. And then when we talk into the scenarios about skipping the queue in the taxi rank basis, that's when we get to the point where the FVRA element would come. By bringing the spend value down, including the SMEs, the likelihood of having to massage that queue and leave people at the front while others are pulled forward is going to become less so. So that's the reason for that. We will only be doing the FVRA once when we do it at the beginning of the appointment to the framework. But of course, as we run through the life of the framework, there will be the standard commercial checks that commercial do to check the viability of all of the suppliers on the framework. So that hopefully gets around some of the admin elements about the what ifs at the front end. And now we're going to talk about the kind of the order. Now, I've only put the order there. And if there are any SMEs, please don't feel insulted that the SMEs are at the end. It was just the way to articulate it. So the way that we intend to start the framework, or the lots in the framework, so we will have in effect 4 cab ranks, if we're going to use that analogy, they will line up in the order of the score that they achieved during that evaluation process, if that makes sense. Well, you may well find that SME 1 is second, SME 2 is fourth, or whatever, or they could even be first and second in that. It just purely is how it is on the day. So hopefully that explains the starting position. Yeah. Going to run through a number of, I know this is a bit of a busy slide and is probably better articulated in person. So for those on the call, apologies. We'll just have to bear through it. So the top scenario is pretty much the obvious one that you'd expect. Supplier 1 is offered the opportunity, accepts, and then goes to the back of the queue. Relatively straightforward. Next opportunity comes along, supplier 2, front of the queue, so on and so forth. Scenario 2, we look at this opportunity where supplier 1 is offered the opportunity and declines the opportunity. We will have the opportunity to decline because not all of them will fit, may not fit, you may not have the resource, it may be something specific, there may be other constraining factors to that, at which stage we would offer that opportunity to supplier 2. Supplier 2 fulfills that opportunity, they then go to the back of the cab rank system. Supplier 1 remains at the front of the queue. Okay. The third scenario, and this comes to the SME FBRA activity. So, and this could potentially be the opportunity where we see suppliers coming forward to fulfill those activities. We may not. It all depends on the outcome, the size of those SMEs, pertinence to the opportunity as they come through. But in this particular example, the opportunity arrives in front of the queue at this particular juncture are SMEs 1 and 2. For whatever reason, it's not able to offer them that opportunity because of their FVRA scores, financial viability and risk assessment. That is then offered to supplier 1. Supplier 1 fulfills and then goes to the back of the queue.
Excellent for you.
Never is. Never is. SME 1 and SME 2 remain at the front of the queue.
We've had a question come through on Slido that I think is a good point to insert here. So someone is asking whether you are guaranteeing a minimum spend to all successful suppliers.
No.
Okay.
So that's why that was a good answer, wasn't it? Pertinent to the point. Unlike the spend values, no, we can't do that. And we can't do that because all of the opportunities will be of a different size. We don't know the numbers. And we can look at this in a number of ways. So we've looked at it from what's the total contract spend divided by the number of suppliers, and what does that mean from a per supplier basis? I won't insult people's intelligence. Total value of 18 million divided by gets you from that point of view. But because different call-offs come at different times, and there may be more than one per supplier, we may end up with 2 or 3, and we may end up going through some of this contract value, burning through the headroom quicker than we envisage, is one of the kind of reasons why we can't commit to a spend on it. The other bit that I would say from an encouragement perspective is the more you work with the DWP, the closer there'll be more opportunities that are competed through MCF3 for those larger ones. And obviously, whilst there is no favouritism given to those on the framework who regularly work with DWP, understand their requirements, understand their challenges, will be better positioned to answer some of those challenges or answer some of those responses during those competitions as they arise. Yes.
I'm sorry, I forgot about that. Do you foresee any scenario where you would want to offer to, say on the top row, you'd want to offer to supplier 3, where you'd want to offer to a supplier who was further down the queue? So if they'd worked on a project before, or?
So what we ought to have in the room is the business and commercial. So so business would say, yeah, that's what we want to do.
Yeah.
Commercial here, this is how the framework is going to run.
Okay.
And so when I said earlier on, it all comes down to right sizing right at the beginning. Now, there is that opportunity, and the business may say, we're not going to submit. We've got all of these opportunities coming through, and we're going to wait for the cab rank system to go to a certain point and then call that cab. Or alternatively, be competed through another means. But there is no way that, as it stands, that if it was cab number 1 today and we wanted supplier 3 to do it, that would be allowed to play. It would have to be 1, 2, 3, etc. on the way through.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Come through in such an order that, and the whole purpose of this to work is because we need them quicker. So if someone was willing to wait for number 3, for example, which isn't in how we're setting this out, they would get the work done. So
We've tried to avoid the UberX, black cab analogies,
Which one's
minivans, etc., because it then just becomes a nightmare. So we've left it in that scenario of different shapes and sizes, if that makes sense.
I mean, the main thing to sort of say is that the governance of all of the processes doesn't sit in commercial. So for all of our internal governance, it sits with the 4 director generals of business. So for each arm of the business, they dictate the process and governance, not the business sit outside of this. So once this framework we'll make them aware of the framework, how it operates, etc., that they will follow through the governance internally. And it's only after it's gone through that governance, if it needed to go to Minister or Cabinet Office, it would be in this. So that is the way we envisage this working. No queue jumping.
And the other thing that goes with that, and I think it's really pertinent to call it out, is that obviously they see all of these going through. So as they come along, they'll know where they've been appointed to. And therefore, if the same names keep on coming forward for that, it will then become clear that things aren't quite as they should be.
Everything that we awarded on over 10k anyway is on contracts finder. So in terms of the transparency agenda, DWP is fully committed to that. So every opportunity, whether it be through MCF3 or whether it be through this new framework, will be on Contracts Finder. So it'll be visible to people to see. And, you know, we're not trying to do anything underhand here. Hence why we've invited everybody in, just to make sure that people are aligned to this, hopefully understand how Tommy's clearly explaining it with all the colours. And then any questions from yourselves, so you know, welcome people feeding if they think this is a good idea or they think maybe it could work better. Still open for.
Is there a kind of balance?
Could you turn on this for the hybrid?
Thank you. Is there a kind of balance revenue across the suppliers over time across the life of the framework? As in,
Expenditure via supplier will be monitored
Mhm.
throughout the course of the framework's operation. Again, there's no guarantees that can be given. It's on a rotational basis. It's as Stephen says, there are times when some may be 100, some maybe 300 may come through, and it just depends on what that looks like within that opportunity. What I would say is there, and not that I would encourage it, but there is always a way for to decline to see what comes next time round if people wanted to game it. But that's not what we would expect by it. This will be closely managed, and the supplier management aspect of it will be taken absolutely 100% seriously to make sure that supplier 1 through to supplier 20 is given a fair crack of the whip. And where there is an unequal distribution of revenue, there will be that internal review of how and why and what can be done subsequently. So as we go through this and manage this framework on a quarterly, 6 monthly, 9 monthly, annually, et cetera, basis, that's when that particular spend profile will come to the fore. We are acutely aware that with the range in spend for some of these, that there is the potential that some could be more fortuitous than others, merely by the roll of the dice rather than anything else.
The forecast is very difficult because some of this is a ministerial intent where the business is developing. So to start saying we envisage this a couple of bigger ones, but it's not going to work like that, unfortunately. And if they are bigger one, it may be that it tips to 600 and therefore it wouldn't go through here anyway. So as we start moving through our requirements over this period, some will sit within here and then some may sit outside, depending upon the size and scale. And it's that tipping point. We don't exactly know where it sits. It's very difficult to start quantifying, qualifying what those are going to be, whether they sit in here, whether they sit anywhere else. If it was part of a bigger requirement, it could be that they both sit outside of this because there needs to be some continuity, etc. So it is difficult.
Sorry, we have a couple questions coming through on Slido. Is it okay to?
Yeah, we can take it now.
Okay. So one of the questions that sort of relates more directly to this is how long would a supplier have to consider the opportunity before if they decide if they want to accept it or reject it?
I think we would expect a reasonable time for consideration commensurate with the value. And what I mean by that is we wouldn't expect an overnight, here it is, we want you to do this X, give us your answer, because it wouldn't be fair to either party, and you'd end up with a call off that wouldn't work. There needs to be a suitable amount of time to do the due diligence and to do the workup of the statement of work that is agreeable to both parties. And the reason I say that is because we may start a piece of work that says, I've got a need for X and I think it's going to cost Y. Well, actually, when we lift the lid with supplier, whatever it is, 1, for instance, and you go, this is what we're doing, and they say, no, it's going to look, this opportunity, what you're asking for, falls outside of that budget and looks more like this. And therefore, to get the statements of work right and the call off right, that needs to be worked through. So everybody's understanding what the deliverables are, what the value is, what the obligations are. So there would be a time commensurate with the value. We wouldn't expect it to be
complexity as well.
Yeah. We wouldn't expect it to be short, but equally, we wouldn't expect it to be overly long. We would expect it to be, because it's not a competitive process, that's already been done. So the development of the statement of work would be worked between the two parties to get to an agreeable position.
I think one of the benefits of this is if we put out an ITT, eat it. If we've missed anything, or we have to put it out for 2 weeks, we get questions, clarifications, etc. With this, we're able to, we know who is the next supplier. We can pick up the phone, we can have a one-to-one, and where we've done things like pre-market engagement with suppliers, etc. Because we've found that on another frameworks or in other call-offs we have, because on day one you can pick up the phone. It's difficult for us to say it'll be 20 days of a senior consultant, 3 days of this, etc. Start to work it out. Whereas actually, if we sit down with supplier one, talk about requirements, you matter clarifications, we can do it in the same meeting, and it means that it's more fruitful. You have a real clear understanding of what it might be, or that if you want it delivered in these timescales, unfortunately, we don't have the capacity to do it within there, and unfortunately, we want to hand it over to supplier. So I think that's how we see it working, and building up that relationship as well. So that if there's a next one, or you get a clear understanding of what we're working to.
We have another question about whether supplier one will always be offered every opportunity first, regardless of how strong they are in that area. I know scenario 3 talks about, that FBRA.
Scenario 1, supplier 1 will only be offered it when they are front of the queue.
Right. Okay.
So when supplier 1 has done their engagement, they go to the back of the queue. Supplier 2 is then offered the next one. And then once they've done it, supplier 3 is then offered it.
Got it.
I think the quality assessment will drive out people who can deliver what's on here. So we shouldn't really get into a position where the supplier has, is next in the queue and they can't fulfill the requirements. If that was such a niche requirement or specialist requirement, then we always have the potential to defer to the framework if necessary. But what we're hoping, the people who are bidding for these 4 lots will have the capability, capacity, etc., either through themselves or their supply chain or SMEs, whoever, to deliver these. So we don't envisage that there'll be something that's put through one of these where the supplier's going to say, I can't fulfill that. But it's probably more just going to be a timing that they don't have the resource at that time in that specific area, which does happen.
Such a great question. So what documentation will be, have you thought about what documentation will be provided to supply one? Would it be like a draft statement of work? Or are you looking for the supplier to produce that through that dialogue?
We would expect it to be, as we go through the particular engagements, that next call off, once commercial had got a meaningful document as a start of the statement of work from the business, that would then be shared with the supplier. And it's at that point, it becomes an iterative process to get to an agreeable statement of work, at which point, once everybody's happy with it, that's the bit where they would be signing off on it to then become the agreed statement of work with all of the deliverables and payment profiles associated with it.
I think that's the benefit of this, is that that dialogue.
Yeah, exactly.
At the moment, we don't always get that. And I think if we miss something, I think it's easy to have that phone conversation or a meeting with the business as well to say, what do you mean by that? Or can we have this? And I think then hopefully that relationship is far better. We don't get into the realms of, well, you haven't delivered this, you said you'd do that. I think, a real good relationship with the number of suppliers, and then moving forward, hopefully, see where we got to.
Thank you.
I don't know if you wanted to continue on or you want to take some of the.
Should we just do? Should we do next steps and questions, and then we can do next steps and timelines, and then we can do the rest of the questions?
Sounds good.
Is that okay?
Yes, that's fine.
Okay, because it won't take long. I know everybody's tired of listening to my voice, so we'll cut to the chase on this. So, as I said right at the beginning, bit of kind of self-publicism for the RFI that's be available from Wednesday, and it's not like some massive marketing hype to get the launch day and get the anticipation going. It's more a case to make sure that A, I've covered everything, and B, there were no spelling mistakes in it. So so that's the main reason for the fact it's not today. It's to give you time equally to think about what you've heard today and then say yes, no, or maybe. So the RFI is out. We are asking for responses ahead of the Christmas period. We're not asking for Christmas Eve. It's not an onerous document. It is not an onerous document on that basis. It is voluntary. there is no prejudice, perceived bias, positive or otherwise. If you don't want to take part, that's absolutely fine. And in the words of Dr. Johnson, publish and be damned. And so we'll work on that premise. We are keen to understand the appetite. We are keen to understand your views on forms of agreement. And the other one, which is going to be, of course, interesting, is the rate card. So we will take all of that together. And so when we talk about terms and conditions, I'm just going to put it out there right now. We're not taking suppliers' terms and conditions. It will be government terms and conditions. It will be the standard framework type that CCS, Cabinet Office use, etc. Obviously, right sized and shaped, A to DWP, but also to the requirement. So we're not going to be asking for unlimited liability for various aspects of it or prohibitive terms. We are going to take a considered approach to it. So we would just kind of ask for the feedback on that. So it will be available from the 7th. There is the email address. You don't need to write it down because you can all have the slides at the end. So that's the immediate next steps. That brings us to timelines. Happy path, unhappy path, depending on your optimism bias. So when I did it, I thought, right, optimism is we'll get it done really quickly. And I go, but hang on, that means we're not going to get many suppliers. Oh, let's be optimistic then. And we're going to have loads of suppliers. And then it's going to take longer to evaluate. So there are the two. So cutting to the chase, really. We want this in as soon as possible. We need to do the due diligence about it. We need to have the opportunity to let the supply chain have time to digest it, come back, think about it all, and make a meaningful proposal for the period of the term that we're looking for. Yes, we'd love to have it in place by April. We recognise that we might be inundated, and therefore the assessment of 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 responses is going to take longer to get through. So that's why there's this kind of unhappy path if we want to, depending on whether your glass is half full or empty to start with.
And you want to enjoy Christmas.
Yeah, yes, look, nothing in, yeah, no December. Does that make sense? And I think that is the last one. Yeah. Does anybody want to focus on the last one, or are we comfortable with that broad aspirational perspective of hopefully April, June as a kind of other position?
Shall I go to the questions that we have on Slido?
No, we're done. But yeah, please.
So will the number of suppliers awarded a place be per lot or across the?
Yes, so there will be 5 suppliers per lot,
Okay.
3 large suppliers, 2 SMEs on each of the lots.
Okay. Great. Next one. Do suppliers have to bid on every lot? What if we only wanted to bid on a couple of the lots?
I knew it was coming.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we will only appoint people who want to bid for all of the lots can bid for all of the lots, and they will be evaluated in conjunction with all of those that are bid for lot X. If people only want to bid for lot 4, procurement, they don't need to bid for everything. But if you want everything, you need to bid for everything.
All right, great. Will this framework be exclusively T&M, or will it allow for alternative commercial models, example, fixed fee, contingent fee, outcomes-based delivery?
We would normally do it as per the standard Management Consultancy Framework 3 practices, which I'm going to pass over to Stephen, but I would suspect is delivery-based milestone payment. Is that right?
We can do a variety.
Right.
A variety of, depend on the specific work package. Sorry. Hello, by the way, I'm Stephanie Howe. Apologies for being late on the train. Nothing I could do. Nothing I could do about that, I'm afraid. But yes, we, much like with it when we use MCF3, Some of the work will be cap T&M, some of it will be milestone or fixed price. So we can do whatever the work package dictates for a particular piece of work.
Also had a question about how will the pricing work? Will there be a rate card? I think I saw.
Yeah. There will be a rate card.
Have you considered a pre-qualification questionnaire as a way to reduce the listed?
We have.
Yep.
We have indeed. And again, similar to the two options, I was going to say unhappy and happy element, the size of that period of evaluation depends on the number of suppliers that we receive.
Yeah.
Hopefully, we'd like to be in a position that if it's that at this point, that we can then move to a position where the final evaluation element looks more like that rather than that.
Mhm.
If they both look like that, something's gone slightly adrift.
Right, we have a question here. We work with clients and consultancy organizations to embed change and transformation via innovative learning solutions. Could we access a lot or would we need a partner?
Through learning solutions.
Via innovative learning. It looks like they focus a lot on training. Another question from the same person that's asking is about if the lots are still in draft, would you consider adding a training and engagement activity to the relevant lot?
So we said at the beginning that there are some activities that lie outside of this team and therefore this framework's activity. Training is one of them. We spoke also, we spoke about upskilling and knowledge transfer from a kind of development perspective. That is absolutely project specific. So there are other frameworks and routes to market specifically for learning and training activities. The training activity and the platform for using that would have to be pertinent to the call-offs that were being let under the 4 lots.
Yeah.
So there was not a training lot with this.
Okay.
Does it sit within professional services?
No, there's a separate learning and development framework which is under CCS already. So obviously we
Okay.
can't tread on the toes of a separate framework that's dedicated to that. But as Tom said, if it's something change and transformation specific, and it's upskilling related to that change or transformation, or comms related to the change or transformation, then it may fit under lot 1.
But it won't be the primary emphasis of the work.
No.
Right.
It will be
Okay.
and maybe an element of it. So in most of this, there'll be a requirement for us to do some skills transfer. There always is, so a requirement from our governance that, but if it's the major part, it wouldn't feature in one of
No.
those.
Okay. So it
It's
doesn't
a
mean
small
partnership would be-
Yes. I think when we were saying before around there may be a supplier who maybe have an SME or whatever, that might be that element of the work, but because we don't know the exact forecast of the work coming through at this point in time, we can't say for definite, but it won't be the main emphasis of any of the requirements we put out.
Another question here says jumping from SME to major supplier effectively excludes a significant share of the market, i.e. 250 people up to the majors. Can a third tier be added? To cover something? It disappeared from the screen. I don't know.
I think Tom's already covered this point. I think we're not looking at tiering. What we're saying is there is an SME and then anything else. So if they sat in between, that's coming with the supply 1, as we showed on the graphic. So the only thing that we're quantifying is the SME, and everybody else is a non-SME. So we're not missing a tier. We're just saying the tier that we would start at the bottom of is SMEs, and then anybody else would sit above there. Hopefully that clarifies the question.
Yeah, I can't tell from. Okay, it says what happens if the buyer doesn't like the price that the supplier at the front of the queue offers?
Well, I think this all comes down to that iterative process, that collaboration process of building the statement of work. There'll always be that we think this is what we want and we think it's going to cost us X. Now that could always be undercooked or overcooked, and it's part and parcel of that conversation and business decision to get to an agreeable position to it. If it is a stellar difference between the two, and if the advice from the supplier is it's an order of magnitude higher, so for instance, it's now in the MCF3 territory, we'd be duty bound to compete it via MCF3. If we weren't comfortable with it and there was a fundamental difference to it, we'd have to take a management view on that. But equally, it may well be that if the feedback and the specifics drove us to a point, that point may well be, well, let's compete it. If we are fundamentally opposed in the positions, then let's see let the market decide.
I think we're looking to set a sort of average man-day rate expectation, aren't we?
We're looking to set a rate card, which is why I was kind of slightly hesitant when I mentioned rate card right at the end about that. And then we would expect in that broad P times Q aspect of, we think it's about X amount of FTE for Y amount of period, we think it would look like this cost. Now, if it's a case of those order of magnitudes for the amount of effort, not the rate card per se, but the effort is fundamentally different, that's where the two aren't going to meet. And that's the point where there needs to be, I wouldn't say arbitration or intervention, but that's the point at which the specialists need to kind of come together. And the specialist in this case is market forces. And the market would say, right, okay, you've gone out for this. And then the responses would be a myriad under MCF3. That would be the way of resolving that issue if we couldn't bring the two together. I don't think there's ever been a point, as there, Stephen, where there's been a fundamental difference of.
No, I can't think of any.
No.
I think most suppliers are quite reasonable. So, yeah. We have a hand up, so.
Yeah.
I remember. You gave a range earlier about the value of contract awards. Can you say a bit more about the type of work you'll be putting through this? Is it sort of resource augmentation, or are you looking for project specific?
It's all project specific that we've taken the data from. So contingent labour sits outside of this. A lot of the work has been done, and it could be lower level initial strategy concept. It could be some CX work that's gone on. It has been, some of it's been process related. So when we started this, when we started sifting the previous expenditure into buckets, we did end up with a kind of business improvement, process improvement bucket, which we then kind of, with broader consultation, changed into, renamed into change and transformation. Because while some of it has been at that lower level, more tactical work, there is more strategic work of a more transformative nature coming in, but of a similar type of activity. But it has been, I could provide some data in terms of what a stack chart would look like with lower end spend when we looked at it and evaluated the potential impact of hiving out everything below 120,000 and doing it just solely for SME spend. It was somewhere in the region of about 10% of the total value fell below the 100,000 level.
The difficulty is the forecasting. Some of this is like ministerial intent, by business plan and bigger programs. That's the difficulty. To start quantifying it is probably giving you the wrong picture. And I think what we're seeing in some of the spend that's gone through at the moment, it doesn't map back to what historical spend has been. So we can't say this is what it did look like. So therefore, this is what it's going to look like. It doesn't at the moment. So I think all the work that Tom did to try and put these into different buckets doesn't really help, if that makes sense. So you might think, this is what's coming, and it might be totally about.
Yeah. With the efficiency challenge, anything could be thrown at us, which is why we want to have this kind of call off so we can quickly, bring a supplier in to help us. So, I mean, in answer to your question about, could it be resource augmentation? It is remotely feasible that we might have 2 or 3 people in a policy area, and they come up with a new initiative and they want somebody to come and help us impact it. So it's possible you would be working then with a joint DWP team, and there will be a requirement for that. But as Steve said, we're kind of anticipating these are the types of things we could get. but it's not a perfect science, unfortunately.
Some
But,
things
it
come
is
left field
feasible.
as well, don't they, like the efficiency challenge.
Yeah.
Some time ago, so an announcement is made in the House, partner's got to react. And the size and scale of that will depend upon the nature of what's been announced. So that's the difficulty. That could be a small piece of work for some smaller departments. For us, as one of the biggest government departments with just under 100,000 staff, and operating as a number of different businesses, in effect, that's huge. That's a huge undertaking for us. So it is very difficult for us to sort of give the size and scale to this, but it does fit. And I think in terms of things like procurement, we do use contingent labour because that also sits in my area and Stephanie's area. So we do use contingent labour to support procurement activity. And we do use, because we're going through a massive transformation journey. We've got a huge digital agenda. We brought a lot of our digital services in-house as well. So that's quite a huge piece of work. And we're looking at moving forward as part of the pace and bringing in digital systems.
We have another question. Could you clarify whether suppliers are required to respond to the RFI, or if we can skip the RFI and still bid for the framework?
Can indeed. We would prefer it if you participated to shape it,
Yeah.
to shape the
possible.
response, because if you don't say what's good, bad or indifferent to it, it will be, as I glibly said before, publish and be damned, and we'll have to live with the consequences of it. We'd rather, hence why we're doing this consultative process, get the feedback and say, this works, that doesn't work. Have you thought about doing this differently? We would have an allergic reaction to X. We like Y. We're going to give you 20% off the MCF3 rate card for those that are on MCF3. Was a joke.
I mean, any ideas particularly about how we can achieve best value is welcome in terms of how we shape this, because clearly DWP is interested in that, and if suppliers can help inform how we deliver it, we would be very much appreciative of that.
We have another question. Given the quickish timelines for establishing this framework, is it fair to assume there's a healthy backlog of work that you wish to place via this framework? And as a follow-up, if yes, is it possible to share high-level details of this pipeline, or at least a view of which lots this pipeline of work falls into? So,
I think I'll pick that then. So I think in terms of what we said before is we receive new requirements probably on a weekly basis. We work through those as they come in, we identify the routes to market. Through MCF3 at the moment. We don't know what's going to come up next month. We do know that there's some huge programs in place, service modernisation, as Tom said, which is a 10-year program. That will be, but we have no backlog. So I can categorically say that. So it's my team that manages the pipeline. There is no backlog. Things that have come in. There are things that may have stored for a short period of time, just to make sure the statement requirements is firm, because it has to go through governance. But apart from that, there's no backlog of work. We don't have a cover just to open and say, great, we've got this in place. I think, as I said at the very start, these are urgent requirements that we're looking at putting through here. If we could wait till next April to open that door and bring them out, that would be fantastic, but we don't.
It'll certainly be work across all 4 lots, would be my view. There's always a lot going on in change and transformation. There are big major transformation programs across the department, particularly the digital space. Org design has been a hot topic for some time, and I'm sure will continue to be so, because when you're talking about efficiencies, you're thinking then about how does your structure look? What are the things that you could do to improve that? So all the things listed on there are deliberately listed on there because they are things we know are likely to come up in the next year or so. And procurement is ongoing. We've got lots of support we need because we have lots of procurement activity, not solely this one, this particular tender that's coming out, but we have lots of procurement activity. The strategy one, I guess historically we've had less in the strategy space perhaps, but because we're talking about efficiency challenges and new ideas, we've got a new ministerial team, so there will inevitably be new ideas coming out of that ministerial team. So that's why we're thinking, we need the capacity to have support in those areas. So I hope that helps a little bit. The outline,
Outline scopes.
outlined scopes,
I think
only if they.
you don't have to bid for all lots, but the lot you bid for, you need to meet the
Yeah.
requirements, because I mean, if you didn't meet all the requirements, you would probably score lower on quality and therefore potentially wouldn't be one of those, so.
Are there going to be ISO requirements in the SQ? If so, which ones? This will help SMEs pre-qualify.
There's a standard security requirement, isn't there, for DWP? So, yeah.
Is there a minimum number of supplier interests required per lot to make the bidding process viable?
Well, more than one.
Obviously, we'd like several. But
I think this is a great opportunity for particularly SMEs, etc.
Mm.
Maybe they, under MCF3, maybe they don't feel that they get an opportunity to do business and they've got, so.
Oh, no, I don't want to interrupt.
Oh,
It's following on from that.
So I think this is an opportunity,
Mm.
great opportunity to work with DWP. It's one of the biggest government departments, and we would hopefully, the fact that we have people fighting for spaces on it, I would say. And I think by saying we can guarantee, hopefully look to guarantee those 2 spaces to SMEs, it'll be looked upon as an ideal opportunity to work closely and have an opportunity, not just through a paper exercise, which most of these things are, that once you're on the lot instruction, it's an opportunity to fully engage with DWP and then.
And you may have
Sure,
picked up in the,
future work that comes through, you're clearly around what our ambitions are, etc. And will help.
you may have picked up in the budget announcements that DWP actually did very well in terms of the allocations. So we have got capacity to do this sort of thing.
Okay, someone is saying that your answer to the
Sorry.
question about the ISOs had broken up. So just to repeat it, because the people joining online didn't hear.
Yeah, in terms of specifying what it is, that will be in the spec in terms of what the security requirement is, but we do have a minimum standard that people must meet for DWP as a whole.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Sorry, you had a question.
Hi, I'm from William Alexander Consulting. So we're an SME and we're working directly with HMRC on several change programs, but we haven't worked with DWP before. So being optimistic, we'd love to bid for an SME lot, but being pessimistic, maybe those lots will be awarded to companies already working with DWP. But in that case, potentially, it would be good to have conversation with the prime suppliers, just like we're doing on the Dallas framework for HMRC. Is there going to be a published list of companies interested, primes and SMEs, so we can make connections with the primes to have conversations along the way? This is happening in another framework.
I think it's something we can take definitely.
Take it away.
Yeah.
In terms of techUK, what we have done in the past, and we're trying to actually find a more efficient way of doing this, is after an event such as this, we would ask if suppliers are willing to share details with each other to then be able to network. And those that responded, they are willing, and then we share everyone's details with those who have agreed to do so. And then from there, you guys take it forward. So it's something that we could possibly facilitate. I mean, we are looking for a more efficient way to do this rather than everyone emailing Jill and then Jill sending out a spreadsheet. But that's going to take a while for us to build a platform specifically for that. But if there's interest, that's something that we could help to facilitate afterwards as well.
I think for everyone calling in the room, that's been happy to do that. I think there are going to be SME positions on the framework, so it's not like.
Oh, we'll still go for it.
Okay,
But it is just good to have those conversations with the prime suppliers as well. And we found those started conversations to help other areas of government that we hadn't even considered, that we can work together. So it's good to know who they are rather than spamming everyone at certain large consulting firms. Thank you.
I was just going to ask the question, have you had thought about how to right size this procurement process so that, given the value of the contracts and things, you get the evidence you need to make the right decision, but you're not overburdening SMEs or even the larger organisations like my own with the procurement process?
We thought about how we were going to run it. We thought about the route to market. We thought about the construct. We contemplated doing a broader supplier number per lot, therefore making it easier to bid. But then that would then drive into well, how do we then manage the call-off process thereafter, both from a quality perspective, but also from a rotational share of revenue and spend perspective. And the viewpoint was that we've got a number of routes to market that we can deal with. We can do MCF3, we could do direct award outside of the framework below the threshold values as per PPN 1121, I think it is. And equally, when it comes to this, rather than having 181 suppliers and we have a ad hoc mini competition every time, we decided to go for something that was more targeted towards DWP, bring suppliers on who we are going to use. And therefore, in order to having decided to take that approach, we do need the rigor behind that from those responses to make sure that those we appoint are relevant to what we're looking for.
I suppose it's a once and done though, isn't it?
This is a once and done.
As opposed to,
Yeah.
like we were saying, you may continually think, I'm going through another competition, another competition, another competition. The amount of time that you expend for that is probably hopefully going to be far greater than for this. But we still have to go through the qualitative evaluation, as everyone will know. We can't.
Yeah.
Yeah. Where we can try and make it as simple.
For the ITT as well, it's going to be
No, I mean, something we'll definitely take on board. I think the other thing as well is in terms of the timescales as well. We do appreciate for SMEs sometimes there may be longer timescales in terms of having the ITT out, etc. And hopefully by giving you a clear indication of when we anticipate that to be, if this is something you're keen to bid on, at least hopefully, that time's in your diary, if that makes sense. But again, just doing it once and then hopefully then if you get onto the framework, then potentially then through the cycle of taxi ranking, then you'll realise that there may be opportunities or repeat opportunities for you in terms of that. And like you said, for some SMEs to build up that knowledge of DWP.
We do recognise that with it being a framework, there is the framework terms and then there's the call-off terms as well. So it is a broader exercise in terms of the due diligence and therefore the onus placed on the bidders, both SME and non-SME for that. But to Stephen's point, once it's done once and we're then through, and it then becomes what we've lost on the swings, we win on the roundabouts with regards to time to market, time to completion, speed to onboarding.
I'm conscious we have 15 minutes left and we have 7 questions still to go.
Okay.
So is social value going to be considered at the framework application and or the call-off level?
It will be at the framework level.
So, okay, and not at call-off.
No.
Will the supplier staff need to be SC cleared?
They will need to meet the requisite the requisite security clearance, whether it's
We would only normally do SC clearance if the specific project required SC. So we expect all the baseline security checks to be done on people. The only time we would have SC clearance is if the project was specific, it did a high level of clearance. So hopefully answers the question on that one.
I think someone mentioned DWP having an expectation of rates or rate cards. Is this correct? Can you please elaborate?
Yeah, that was me. You may have noticed in recent MCF3 competitions, we've set an expectation of an average man-day rate for the type of work that's involved. So we're looking to do that again for this one.
What will the role of the incumbent supplier be in scoping out work for the next taxi in the round? Does this pose a delivery risk?
No, because there is no incumbent now, and the supplier one does their work and disappears to the back of the queue. The people who scope the next activity is the DWP operational department and the commercial team. So there is no bias, there is no legacy from the previous engagement. They are all discrete, standalone call-offs.
Having done one piece of work doesn't mean you naturally get the next piece of work. If there was a piece of work that would move on, it's either a precursor to a bigger piece, and there is no link. So it's clearly you deliver A, B will be competed maybe by MCF3. So we sometimes get that now. If someone does a small piece of preparatory work, The second piece through governance will always be competed. You know, that's what we're aiming for. There'll be competition, fair, open, transparent for that.
And we'll have to manage the business, you know, to explain to them in relation to their requirements, they need to be discreet. This needs to be, you know, has a start and an end, and don't assume that you're going to have a phase 2, which is the same supplier. You have to have a discreet, otherwise the taxi rank won't work.
Down to 3 questions now. Will the rate card be shared?
We'll give specific direction on the rate card.
Is there a risk that you will have the same suppliers from MCF3 on the DWP framework?
Some,
Limits the skills that you have access to.
I think, is the answer to that. Just because you're on MCF3 doesn't mean you'll be automatically appointed to this. This is via competition. There are those who will be suppliers on MCF3 who will apply for this, probably for all 4 lots, who will through value be appointed to one or more of those lots, dependent on the overall value of the and quality of those submissions across the board. So they'll stand or fall in conjunction with the other competitors. From, are we bringing any fresh blood into the pool? The answer is yes, because that's why we're using the SME element to bring it, to bring that opportunity and that newness and that opportunity to work with DWP.
Is already providing consultancy to DWP via G-Cloud. Do we have to reapply to continue working in this framework?
No, but you need to apply to the framework.
That we shouldn't be using G-Cloud framework for pure consultancy. So it depends what it is for. I think sometimes it gets a bit confused. If it's pure consultancy, it should come through my team, whereas G-Cloud activities would not come through my team because they are meant to be for digital cloud related activities. So if you're on G-Cloud and you think it's pure consultancy, you should be either bidding for this or MCF3 or whatever the
And if you're on any other framework, you'll need to apply for this framework. Being a supplier on another framework doesn't automatically give you rights to be on this one,
Or any
unless you go
preference,
through.
or any preferential treatment.
Yeah.
It's a new framework, the new requirements.
Thank you. We've gone through all of the questions that we had come through on Slido. I don't know if anyone wants to sort of put their hand up for any other questions, or anyone in the room have any questions that they haven't yet asked that they want answered. Okay. That looks like we've covered everything. I don't know if you have any final things.
I'd just like to say thank you very much for coming today. Thank you very much for sharing your comments and thoughts. For us, it's invaluable. We do very much appreciate the time and effort that you've put into coming today and to contributing. And thank you for those questions and comments. They are, as I say, absolutely invaluable to us for as we shape this moving forward. So yeah, very much appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you.
We will be sharing the slides and a recording from this event a bit later. And also, we probably will be asking those who would like to have their contact details shared. So we will give a deadline for that, for responding and letting us know. And then from there, those who have said yes, we will share those contacts. Thank you so much for coming. And I think it was really interesting and informative. So good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And Heather, thank you very much for hosting it for us. Do very much appreciate that. And thank you, Jill.
Thank you, everybody. Have a good day.
Thank you.